America has always been a place defined by resilience, a country built by people who refused to stay down, who carried pain, hardship, and uncertainty on their backs, and still pushed forward. The story of this nation has never been about comfort. It has always been about endurance, about rising after falling, about finding strength in the middle of struggle. And there are stories that capture that spirit so perfectly, they almost feel symbolic, as if they represent something much bigger than just one life. This is the story of a boy who grew up in fear, who lived through darkness most people can't even imagine, and who turned that pain into something extraordinary. It is the story of how one human being went from being a scared child trying to survive another night to becoming one of the toughest men alive. And whether you realize it or not, stories like this are deeply connected to what makes people believe in possibility, in transformation, and in the idea that no matter where you start, your future is not decided for you. From the outside, everything looked right. A good neighborhood, a solid home, a family that appeared successful and stable. People driving by would never have guessed that behind those walls there was tension, fear, and chaos that never seemed to end. To the world, it looked like success. To the child living inside that house, it felt like survival. As a young boy, he learned early that life could change in an instant. One moment everything could feel normal, and the next, the atmosphere would shift into something heavy and unpredictable. He learned to stay quiet, to stay alert, to read the room. These weren't lessons a child should ever have to learn, but they became part of his daily reality. While other kids were sleeping, he was working. Long nights, helping with responsibilities far beyond his age, and then waking up exhausted the next morning to go to school. He would sit at his desk fighting to stay awake, struggling to concentrate, feeling like he was falling behind while everyone else moved forward. Teachers saw a kid who couldn't focus. They didn't see the nights that came before the mornings. Inside the house, fear wasn't an occasional visitor. It was part of life, the kind of fear that makes a child feel small, quiet, and invisible. The kind that makes you learn to walk carefully, speak softly, and avoid attention. Even at a young age, he understood that safety was never guaranteed, and that the best way to survive was to stay out of the way. There were moments when the tension became overwhelming, moments when the situation inside the home crossed lines no child should ever witness. Those experiences leave marks that don't fade easily. They shape how you see the world. They change how you see yourself. And in those moments, something begins to grow inside a person. Not strength yet, not confidence, but awareness. Awareness that life is not fair. Awareness that pain exists. And slowly, quietly, the beginning of a question starts to form. Is this all there is? There comes a moment in some lives when fear and anger collide. When a person reaches a point where something inside them shifts. For him, that moment came early. Watching the chaos unfold around him, feeling helpless, feeling trapped, something inside him refused to stay silent. He was still just a child, small, vulnerable, powerless in almost every way. But that moment planted something deep inside him, a refusal, a quiet resistance. The first spark of a mindset that would later define who he became. It didn't make the situation better. It didn't suddenly change his life, but it changed him. And sometimes that's where transformation begins, not in success, not in victory, but in the moment someone decides, deep down, that they don't want to stay weak forever. Eventually, the life he knew ended. With very little money and no certainty about the future, his mother made a decision that changed everything. They left. They drove away from the life they knew and stepped into the unknown. There were no guarantees waiting for them, just hope. But starting over doesn't erase the past. The emotional weight followed him. In school, he struggled. He felt behind, different, out of place. He had trouble learning, trouble focusing, trouble believing in himself. At times, it felt like the world was confirming his worst fears, that he wasn't smart enough, that he wasn't strong enough, that maybe he was exactly what his circumstances said he was. And for a while, it seemed like that might be true. Childhood experiences shape the way people see themselves. When you grow up in chaos, it leaves scars that aren't always visible. Stress, fear, and uncertainty don't just disappear. They follow you into classrooms, into friendships, into the way you think about your own potential. There were times when he felt completely lost, times when he doubted himself, times when it seemed easier to accept failure than to fight against it. That kind of mental battle is something most people never see. It happens quietly, inside a person's mind, day after day. And yet, something kept building. Even in the middle of doubt, something inside him refused to completely give up. Over time, he began to understand something powerful. No one was coming to save him. No one was going to magically change his life. If he wanted something different, he would have to build it himself. Step by step, day by day. That realization changed everything. The boy who once felt weak started chasing strength. The child who felt behind started pushing himself harder. Slowly, the pain that once held him down began to fuel him. Every struggle became a reminder of where he came from. Every challenge became a test of who he could become. That mindset would eventually lead him to push his limits in ways most people never would. To face pain instead of avoiding it. To test himself again and again, not because it was easy, but because he refused to go back to the person he once was. The child who couldn't stay awake in class. The boy who grew up surrounded by fear. The kid who felt like he didn't belong anywhere. Would grow up to become a Navy SEAL, an endurance athlete, a symbol of mental toughness, not because life was kind to him, but because it wasn't. And sometimes, the hardest beginnings create the strongest people. Stories like this remind us that strength isn't something you're born with, it's something you build. Through pain, through struggle, through refusing to quit. And maybe that's why stories like this matter so much. Because they remind us that no matter how dark the beginning is, the ending is still yours to write.